everybody, Bob here, and welcome to another Making Stuff video. I am working on a couple of really big projects right now, and I'm not quite finished with them. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to make my own automatic center punch. So let's head on over to the workbench and get this started. So this is an automatic center punch, and if you've watched the Making Stuff channel, you've seen me use this several times. And it's basically just a punch tool that you can use one-handed, and you just put it down on anything you want to mark a spot to drill a hole, and you just push down. You can hear it make that click, and what it does is it puts a little dimple right here in the metal, and that makes it easier for me to put a drill bit on that exact spot and drill a hole. So I thought it would be fun to try and make one of these. That way I can just customize my own automatic center punch. So I'm going to take this apart and see if I can't figure out how it works. Alright, so I've taken this apart and analyzed it, and it consists of two main parts. You've got the striker mechanism in the front, and then in the back you've got a hammer. Now I'm going to take this apart and show you what I have figured out, and it's very simple how this works. The striker just resembles a nail, and this is kind of a little rounded, and I think that's just so these pieces can pivot on each other, and you'll see how this works in a second. And then the other piece is this, and it just consists of another little kind of firing pin looking nail that's also rounded. So these butt up against each other like so that kind of gives it a little pivot action. And you'll see why that's important here in a second. And then you've got this spring. And if you notice the spring, as you go down here toward this end, it gets narrow and it's kind of pointed inward at an angle. So it goes over like this, and that's important because what it does is it holds this pin in here in an angle. And if you can see that, you can see this little pin, it's not in the center of the spring, it's off to the side. So the key to this is that when this spring is compressed, it moves to the center. And when it's not compressed, it wants to fall to the side. So that's the key to how this works. So here on the other end, there's a hammer. There's a spring, that's your hammer spring. And this little hammer has a hole in it. So when it's not compressed, the pin's going to fall off to the side. But when you push down and compress this, the pin's going to move to the center, and it will eventually fall in that hole, like so, which will cause the hammer mechanism to fire, pushing the whole thing back down, and then that gives you the hammer effect that you need to mark a little dimple in your workpiece with the striker. So basically all I need to do to make one of these is just duplicate all these parts and then make an outer shell to go around it, and everything should work. Alright, so the way I'm going to make those little inside pieces is I'm going to use a 5/16 and a 1/4 inch bolt. I'm going to cut the heads off and then use this unthreaded part of the bolt. And the reason I'm doing this is because I don't have this round stock here in the shop, and I don't feel like waiting on it. And if you watched the channel before, you know I like using off-the-shelf parts. And I do have some 1/2 inch brass, and I'm going to put that in the lathe, and we will turn our outer shell with the 1/2 inch brass. So this is what I'm going to use. So let's head over to the workbench and get started. Alright, so I've got the heads of the nuts cut off here. I need to clean off that face, and I'm going to do that here on the mini lathe. And I just want to point out that I'm using my new quick change tool post and holder kit that I had to replace because the old one that was on here, the company had gone out of business, and you could no longer get these holders for it. So I had to change it over to something else so I could get more holders. And If you're in the same boat as I am, there's a link to this in the description of the video. Or if you want to upgrade your current mini lathe to a quick change tool post holder, check out the link that's in the description of the video. All right, so I'm not working on any plans here, but I will have the measurements to all these pieces at the end of the video. So I'm just going to copy these pieces that were in my automatic center punch that I purchased. So I'm just going to mark the length here and cut this, turn it down, and then cut it on the lathe. All right, so I am going to be cutting steel, so I'm going to be using some cutting lubricant on this because I don't want it to get too hot, and I also don't want to break a tool. All right, so I've got my first piece turned on the mini lathe, and I do want to point out, if you're going to try this at home, go very slow, take small cuts, and use some type of lubrication or cutting oil when you cut this, because if you go too fast, you will do what I did here on my first piece, and you will warp this, because it is a very long and thin piece to be trying to turn on the mini lathe without some type of support down here on the end, but it is just too small to put a steady rest or anything else in there to hold this in while it's being turned. So if you just go slow and you're careful, it can be done. All right, so I've chucked the piece up here in my drill, and I'm going to put a point on it by using my belt grinder, and it's just, this piece is too long and thin to even try and think about putting a point on it with the lathe, and this way is just much quicker anyway. All right, so I've rotated this around and cut it to length, and now I need to round off this top part of the nail or the striker, whatever you want to call it. And again, the best way to do this is to just chuck it up and do it on the belt grinder. All right, so I've got what's left of that 1/4-inch bolt chucked up in the lathe, and I'm going to turn that little firing pin, and it is actually smaller than the little striker that we just made, so I have just as little bit as possible sticking out from the chuck. That way I have less risk of actually breaking this piece. All right, so I've got the first part of the little firing pin made, so now I need to make the back part of it. So I'm going to put this in the lathe and continue working on it. So I chucked this up in the grill and cleaned it up on the belt grinder just like I did the striker piece. The one thing I do want to point out is right here on this face, you do want this flat. You want it as flat as you can get it. You do not want it rounded off or pointed, and I will go more into that here in a little bit. So now I have switched over. I've put the 5/16 bolt into the lathe, and this is going to be used to make the hammer, and I need to drill a 3mm hole in the end of it before I can cut it to length. All right, so let's see how well I did on these internal pieces. Here's the original nail or striker. Then there's my little copy of it. And it is a little bit shorter, but that doesn't matter because this is what just sticks out the end of the tool. And here is the original firing pin, and then here's my firing pin. And then, last but not least, the original hammer, and then my hammer. And they do have the little 3mm hole on the end of it. All right, so I've got my brass rod all set up here in the lathe, and I'm going to start by facing off the end. All right, because I don't have any metric taps, I am going to have to use imperial, and the threads I'm going to be using are 7/16 by 20. So I'm going to drill a hole in this piece. This is the end cap, and it will be 25/64. That way I can thread the inside of it with my 7/16 tap. So now that I've got the end threaded, I'm going to pretty it up a little bit. There's what the end cap looks like. Now I just need to clean this end up here, and this piece will be finished. All right, so I'm going to start on the next piece, and that would be the middle section, and this is probably going to be the hardest one to turn on the lathe because it's drilled from both sides, and then as you can see down inside there, it doesn't drill all the way through, and then there's a smaller size hole in there that you cannot get the calipers to. So I think what I'm going to do is just run some drill bits down in there and then determine what size that hole is, and then I can start working on this piece. All right, so I wanted to show this to you guys. If you remember on that middle piece, there's a small hole in the middle and you don't want to drill all the way through. So what I did here is you can see this is the side of the lathe. So I'm going to zoom in here and you can see, there we go. You can see in that hole, this is looking all the way through the chuck. You can see the light coming through the little bitty hole that's in the middle. So what I did is I took real shallow cuts, just pecked at it a little bit, and then each time I'd take a little bit of brass out of that hole, I'd back the drill bit out and come look through here and see if I could see the light coming through. And then when I saw the light coming through, I knew I had drilled deep enough. All right, so here's the middle section. I got it all drilled out. Everything looks okay. It measures all right on the calipers. So now all I need to do is just pretty this piece up. All right, so here is the completed middle section, and you can see that the middle hole in there is there. I didn't drill all the way through, and I also have both sides threaded. So let's take the end cap here and let's see how well these made up. There we go. So we're 2/3 of the way done. Now I'm going to start on the tip that goes on this end. All right, so I finished that last piece up. Turned out pretty good, I think. Looks nice. So now it's time for the moment of truth. So I want you guys to do one thing. I want you to put in the comments, I'm going to put all the pieces together. Do you think this is going to work? So let me know in the comments. Don't cheat and fast forward. Just yay or nay. Here we go. Let's put it together. And that's the middle piece. And the hammer spring, and then finally the top. So that is the finished product. It looks nice. I think it looks nice. But does it work? Well, let's find out. 3, 2, 1. All right, it works. So there we go. Automatic center punch. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few things because I know you guys will ask if I do not show you. And the first is, what did I do for springs? Well, I just got some springs out of a little spring kit you can get at Harbor Freight. You can find them online. I've seen them at flea markets. I'll put a link to the one that I used in the description of the video. But all you have to do is really just bend the end of the spring so that it's at an angle. And just remember that you want the pin, you don't want it to be centered when the spring is not compressed. But then when you do compress the spring, you want it to center like that. That's the key to making the whole thing work. So really all you have to do is just find a spring that'll fit and then just bend the end. Just bend it up, you know, just like that right there. That's the one from the purchased automatic center punch. Okay, and then the next thing that I'm going to show you guys is the firing pin itself. Now, if anybody knows what's going on here, leave a comment. But the steel, I think, was just too soft from those bolts. And this surface here, the flat surface on the end of that firing pin has to be flat. And what happened to this one is it rounded over, and then when it rounded over, the tool lost its ability to actually punch hard enough to make a divot in the metal. So what I did is I flattened it back out, and then I heated this up red hot and then dipped it in some water to cool it down real fast. And I think that's I think that hardened it enough. I don't know if it's hardenable metal. Like I said, some of you knife makers might know. Leave a comment, let us know what's going on here. But that did seem to fix the problem. and the surface here on that stays nice and flat. It doesn't round over, and that seems to cure the problem, and the tool works fine. All right, and as promised, here are all of the measurements to the project. You may have to do a little bit of fine tuning. That's what I had to do to get the final thing to work, but this will get you close. So I've got links to all of the tools in the description of the video. Please go there and check that out. And also in the comments, let me know what you think about this video. I know I talked a little bit more than I normally do, and it did run a little bit longer, but if you guys like that, let me know in the comments. And if you like the video, please give me that big thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing and ring that bell. And thanks for watching.